as you mentioned, the last time we had you on was right before the Alabama lost to Texas, and man, a lot's happened since then. They had the close call at USF and the quarterback controversy before Jalen Milroe reclaimed the starting job, and yet here we are in October, heading into November, and they're 7-1, and they're right in the top 10, and they're right in the thick of the college football playoff race. Give us a sense for how Alabama has bounced back from that early swoon that they had in September.
Yeah, I think obviously it starts with the quarterback position. And even though Jalen Milroe had his ebbs and flows in the first few weeks of the season, you got the sense that the team was behind him as a leader and as a person. And I think some of that kind of reflected itself in the South Florida game where the other quarterbacks aren't playing well, but Jalen Milroe is just being the ultimate teammate on the sidelines, cheering those guys on. And Alabama was able to win. And then right after that, Nick Saban just got in front of it and named him a starter. And then talking to some people on the beat, they said that that's something that he really has never done in his tenure, is just come out and publicly endorse a starter and just move off of it from there. So I think that that South Florida game was a turning point for a few different reasons. I think it provided evidence that Jalen Milroe is the best option when you saw what Ty Simpson and Tyler Buckner were able to do. And I think it just kind of unified the team because Jalen Milroe was seen as the leader of the team. And you've seen guys, offense and defense, just kind of rally around him from there. And on the field, I think Tommy Rees, week by week, you're starting to see him embrace Jalen Milroe's strengths as a player. You're starting to see the deep ball passing. You're starting to see a little bit more read option. You're starting to see a little bit more of those zone reads. You're starting to see a little bit more of the RPOs that made Bama's offense lethal over the last few years. So I think it's been a mix of both of the team and the coaching staff rallying around Jalen Milroe and then using his strengths to the best of his ability to push Alabama's offense forward. Defensively, it's still an elite Alabama defense. They've been one of the best second half defenses in the country, which going back to last year, that was something that really hurt them in losses to Tennessee and LSU, giving up, 20 plus points in the second half. They've been really good at making those adjustments this year. And here we are at Alabama 7-1 and a huge test against LSU this weekend, number one offense in the country. So I think it's going to stretch Alabama on both sides of the ball. Is the defense going to be able to hang with an LSU offense, which at least in my opinion, this is the first time since that Texas game where there are going to be equal caliber athletes on the perimeter to Bama's defensive backs. So how are they going to respond after what happened in the Texas game? And then Alabama's offense, if LSU starts scoring points in bunches, you have to ask yourself, is Alabama's offense equipped to hang around in a shootout type of game? There hasn't been a moment like that this season. Alabama's offense has really been boom or bust. There hasn't really been a lot of consistency. So you wonder, if LSU gets up 10 points, 14 points, or they just start scoring, on every possession or every other possession, is Alabama's offense going to be able to hold serve at home?
Ken, I was going to ask you about that. Just as you're 8 games in now, you got a lot better sense of the strengths and weaknesses of this particular Alabama team. And I'm curious what you circle in terms of the LSU matchup as the big challenges and the big opportunities, but also like as you've covered this team and watched this season evolve. Does it feel to you like maybe you're covering a playoff team? Does it feel like it's still a work in progress? Kind of where is your own kind of sense of maybe the ceiling of this group?
Yeah, in terms of LSU in that matchup, I think the biggest question that I have is what's going to be of Harold Perkins' role in this game? Is Harold Perkins going to line up on the left side opposite of Caden Proctor and try to rush the passer? Alabama's offensive line, the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but they're near the bottom in pretty much every category that you can think of: sacks, pressures allowed, pressure rate, time that Jalen Milroe holds on to the football. So is Harold Perkins going to be a game wrecker on the edge, or are they going to place him as a spy to make sure that Jalen Milroe doesn't hurt LSU's defense with his legs? So that's the matchup that I'm going to be looking for. As far as Alabama's team, it does somewhat feel like a playoff team. I think the landscape kind of lends itself to that belief, though. It's not that Alabama is playing like a playoff team consistently, but it's when you look around the country, there really hasn't been a team that has really just asserted themselves every single week as a super team. Obviously, Georgia's had a couple of dominant performances in a row, but they've had their ebbs and flows. Michigan has been consistent throughout, but you can question their schedule, and they're going to have to play some big games, obviously, with Penn State and Ohio State at the end. Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, all have kind of had their ebbs and flows as well, even though they're undefeated. So Alabama, from a talent perspective, is right there with any of those teams. And I think that's why you have this belief that Alabama could make it to the playoff and ultimately contend for a championship because, all things equal, they have the guys, athlete for athlete compared to these other teams. So the question for Alabama, in the second half of the season after the bye week is, when is the team going to put together a 4-quarter performance? That's what's missing right now. And probably my biggest observation is Alabama looks like Alabama in stretches. They can look like that for a quarter. They can look like that for a half. They can look like that for a few possessions, but they haven't been able to do that for 4 quarters. And that's what I'm going to be looking for on Saturday.
Yeah, to your point on the talent, I think that's ultimately why we are optimistic, or why there is reason to be somewhat optimistic, because they're still number one in the team talent composite, and they still have all those 5 stars and 4 stars running around. But that brings me to this, and something you touched on with Milroe and Tommy Rees. Do you think that because we talk about us leaving Alabama for dead, do you think that collectively as a college football viewing public, part of that is because we have taken for granted how difficult it is to turn a staff over? Because Nick Saban year after year has coordinator turnover or assistant coach turnover, and it was still able to go like a machine. And then this year, obviously, you have 2 new coordinators, and it didn't work like that, particularly on offense early on. Do you think as we see Reese and Milroe, kind of meld together a little bit better and kind of a better understanding of how they fit together, you think part of the reason why maybe we did leave him for dead is just because we're so used to Nick just plugging in guys and letting it go, and it just isn't always going to work that way?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think there's something to that on a few different levels. I know there's the famous coaching staff, might have been from 2015, 2016, where there's like 6 or 7 different head coaches on that Alabama staff with Mario Cristobal and Kirby Smart and Mel Tucker and Lane Kiffin and those guys. And you look at this Alabama staff right now, there's not really anybody that you can just point to and say that guy is going to be, the next Power 5 head coach, or he's the next sexy coordinator assistant for a head coaching job. And that's not to say that it's not a good coaching staff, but obviously you see the kind of attrition year after year when Alabama remains at the top. Programs want to pick from that. They want to get somebody as close to Saban's greatness as possible and bring that over to their program. And it's hard to replace what you're losing with, an assistant of equal caliber. So I think that's a part of it. I think development is a part of it as well. When you look at certain positions on Alabama's team from a position standpoint, like wide receiver as an example, Alabama last few years has kind of been like that wide receiver U. Since 2020, they've lost half of their, signees to the transfer portal. So it's hard to, develop guys. They're consistently having to go into the portal. It's brought mixed results. Offensive line as well. I think you can point to that also. And I think another reason why people left Alabama for dead is what the perceived strength of this team was supposed to be. It hasn't been. It was supposed to be Alabama is just going to line up with this great offensive line and just maul people and run for 250 yards per game. And Milroe was going to be this dynamic dual threat guy, and the offense was going to be humming. And the offensive line is probably the biggest weakness on the team. And they're running for the fewest yards per game in Nick Saban's tenure. So you look at it from that perspective, it's okay, we thought this was going to be a power running team. They can't run the ball. There's questions about Milroe's arm. This team is not going to be able to put all the pieces together to compete for a national championship. So they're starting to put those pieces together, week by week, probably a lot slower than past Alabama teams. But I think there's cautious optimism within the fan base that this team is going to be able to put it all together at the end and hopefully compete for a championship.